This is it, you tell yourself. You've been wanting this for a long time. I've been wanting this for a long time, and I'll never ever sell it. Or do I mean that? For the last 2 years, I've searched for the perfect watch collection, and I settled on the 3-watch collection last year. Now, obviously, that's changed because I brought a new watch in. Now, we're watch nerds. We have a sickness. We like to buy and sell these. It's fun. The hunt is fun. Having new things is fun. Bringing in a new shiny object is fun. And so, it changing is obviously going to be part of the game. Now, the watch that I sold is the Tudor Pelagos 39. I can have a separate video if you want talking about why I let it go. I remember the first time I went into a jewelry store, I walked in and I was interested in trying on anything. I was nervous. I wasn't sure of myself. I didn't really own any expensive pieces. I think at the time, the only thing I owned was a Hamilton Khaki King. And so I was worried about the impression I would give and whether or not they'd even help me. And I was younger, and so it's just kind of part of, I think, watch collecting in general, is that nervousness the first time you actually go into an authorized dealer, especially if you've watched like 200, 300, 400 YouTube videos, you have an impression of these watches and this experience, and when you're there, you put a lot of pressure on it. And so when I went in and I looked at all these different watches, there was one watch that stood out to me that just screamed at me that I had to have it. It was way too expensive at retail. Used, it's obviously a lot less expensive. And so I thought, that's it. That's the watch I've got to have. And I got to say, my feelings on it now, like any of my reviews, are a little mixed. I have mainly positives, but there are a few drawbacks that make it interesting of whether or not it will actually stay within my collection based on how I live my life and how I wear watches. My last 2 negatives are the things that may not make it stay in my collection, and we'll get into those later. So the new watch is the Breitling Navitimer. Now this is the A23322 reference model. It's basically an older version of the Breitling Navitimer. It does not have their current B01 movement. I can do a breakdown of the 2 different movements, but generally the old movement is basically a Valjoux 7750, but slightly modified. So it's a caliber 7753. The current B01 movement has some advancements, and mainly the biggest advancement is it's got a horizontal clutch chronograph. I can go through a huge explanation of the difference between those, but it's less wear if you leave it running versus this is a horizontal clutch with an oscillating pinion. So it's got some wear when it comes to leaving the chronograph running for, a day or 2 days. So that's the main difference between the two, as well as power reserve and a few other technical advances like the hairspring. So this is a base movement. It's what you'd find in the mechanical chronographs of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and on. The 7750 has been a workhorse because of its affordability and its general ruggedness. And again, a separate video if you want on oscillating pinions and why that's such an amazing technological advancement. Let me know in the comments below. But this watch specifically is a 42 millimeter version of the Navitimer with the 7753 movement. It's got the old Wings logo, and I absolutely love the Wings logo. It just seems reminiscent of a time that's now lost, a time that I never lived. And it just gives me a little bit more of that vintage flavor in the dial of the watch. It's got the typical slide rule bezel. It's got a 30-meter water resistance rating, and we can go through what that means a little bit later and my thoughts on it. It's obviously a 40-hour power reserve. It's going to be a really compact shape given the fact that it's 42 millimeters. Now, this is typically made in 43 to 46 a lot of times, but the vintage models, there are a lot that are smaller, and I think they have some modern offerings that are also a little smaller, but this one's perfect for me. It's got the date window down at 4:30. Now, whether or not you hate that or love it, we can talk about a little bit later. And obviously, it's got the subdials at 3, 6, and 9. And there are 2 different configurations of the Navitimer, one with a 12, a 9, and 6, and then this one where they're at the bottom at 3, 6, and 9. Obviously, personal preference on which one you like more. Now, the watch originally came on a leather strap, and the leather strap was worn. It was not my favorite. It was a little... I don't know. It just wasn't great. And I was worried about wearing it. And either way, I switched it over to this strap. This is a sailcloth strap. This is from Artem Straps. This is actually a 21 millimeter strap because they sent me a 21 for the Pelagos. And I loved it so much that I thought, I'll deal with the extra 1mm difference, but then I can at least have a nice strap with this deployment clasp on the Navitimer. And I really enjoy that, especially since it's summer, it's hot here in Indiana. And so I wanted to have, a little bit more water resistant strap than a leather strap from Breitling. Now let's get into aesthetics and feelings on the watch. The watch itself is phenomenal. It is very busy. And obviously that's personal preference. Whether or not you like a busy dial or don't, I typically prefer simplicity, but this feels different. It's got a different feeling to it, a different vibe. I like the busyness in this watch. It just seems like there's a lot going on. And what I like about that more than anything is when you look at it, your attention can be drawn to anywhere on the dial, purely just because of the amount of things that are there. Whereas my other watches that are more simple, you tend to notice more specific things. It's like the difference between seeing something that looks nice and then seeing it under a microscope. When it's simple, you pay attention to every single little detail. When it's busy like this, you notice those details, but it kind of all washes into one. It's obviously a different feeling. I like it, but again, personal preference. The slide rule bezel is nice to operate. The crystal on the front, I noticed, has a blue tint to it, which I thought was interesting. I'm assuming it's an AR coating that's on the crystal itself, probably on the inside, maybe on the outside as well, but it's got a blue tint to that AR crystal, so I thought that was interesting. I never expected that, I guess, on this watch. I don't know if it's an aftermarket crystal or if it came stock like that. So if you do know, let me know in the comments below whether or not I should have that normally. The watch itself is obviously an automatic chronograph, so the chronograph function works fantastic. Start, stop, reset. Now, one of the history things that's interesting about Breitling and this watch is Breitling was the first company to do this 2-button chronograph, meaning that the start and the reset, the start, stop, and reset were 2 separate pushers. Originally, they were like a mono pusher in most chronographs because they started as pocket watches. So this 2-button thing was actually Breitling's invention, has now become standard, and so you would expect it on everything from a Rolex to a Tudor to a Breitling to an Omega. Everyone has these 2-button chronograph movements. The reflective nature of the watch is one of the things that I think is important. We like shiny objects as human beings. That's why we like watches. To be fair, we like fun toys as men, and we like shiny things also as men, as people, and women as well. My wife has watches she likes, and they tend to be slightly shinier. The indices and hands on this are very reflective. I assume they're a steel, and they are incredibly reflective to the point where it gives it a lot of extra feeling, an extra panache, an extra loudness. Under certain lights, the bezel also does the same sort of thing. There's a lot of reflective surfaces on the bezel and on the case because they are fully polished. So you end up with a lot of reflective surfaces, giving you a lot of that shininess feeling, which obviously elevates the feeling of the watch in general. Again, personal preference. I like it. The Navitimer has always felt like a more loud, a more shiny watch, although it's obviously like the text on the watch doesn't look shiny. For whatever reason, the watch itself has always felt like a more expensive, a more shiny watch. It's never really felt like a true tool watch. Now, the first day I wore this, I did wear it straight into the warehouse. I put it to work. I was drilling out some stainless steel post bases, which is some not so easy work. And I was wearing this while I was doing that for, I don't know, I guess the 2.5 hours I was standing at the drill press. And so I thought I'd take a video, and that's me doing that. So I tend to wear my watches without very much reservation. Obviously, if I'm doing something like throwing concrete or pouring concrete, I'm not going to wear a Navitimer during that. But you get what I mean. I tend to try to wear my watches as much as possible, and I tend to think that it makes it more fun when I look back that I really used the watch. The last big positive for me, I think, is the Panda dial. The fact that I have these sub dials that are obviously so white in the black frame, they just pop, and that coupled with the slide rule bezel just gives the feeling of the Navitimer. I don't know how to explain it because there's not really another dial that has that much integrated so seamlessly, I think. Most of the time, that separation on the outside is a bezel, like Daytona, for example, has a bezel that's a different color, and so there's separation there, but that's physical separation. It's not all underneath the crystal. And I thought that was interesting. I did have a comment recently on someone's video. They said that the Navitimer looks like a Reese's cup, and that's why they can never have one. I thought that was really funny. I still don't see the Reese's cup, thankfully. But if you do, I kind of get it. I mean, it's got like a cup shape, and obviously the slide rule gives a different look, and then the bezel itself could be like the ridges on the Reese's cup. If someone else has a better explanation, let me know. But either way, I thought that was very funny. I still don't see it. I still like the watch. It has not ruined it for me, but nice try on the Reese's Cup. So the watch itself, the only other negatives I would say are just going to be the fact that some people won't like the size. Now I have a 6 3/4 inch wrist. The watch wears perfectly. Again, this is a 42 millimeter version. I have worn up to, I think, the 43 and really enjoyed how it wore. The 46 was pretty big, but I love the size of this. The thickness does not bother me at all. I'm getting used to chronographs. I'm getting used to taller watches. Some people might not like the rotor spin. So the rotor itself is an oscillating rotor, obviously like every automatic watch. It is winding only in one direction. So when the rotor winds one way, it winds up the watch. When it rotates the other way, it's just a free balance. So what happens is if you move your arm that direction, it spins in the free balance version. You end up with the sound. You can hear the oscillating rotor spinning in it. If you've owned a 7750, you know what that sounds like. You know that you're used to it, and you can feel it a little bit in your wrist, but it doesn't bother me. It doesn't feel less refined. I thought it might, but it doesn't to me. I kind of knew what to expect because I've had a 7750 before. So that might be something to consider before you buy one if you're looking at the older version. Some of the other negatives, lack of lume. I think that's to be expected with the Navitimer. The date window area, it doesn't bother me. There are versions that have a black date window with white text, and that tends to blend into the dial a little bit more. I kind of like how the white is there. I mean, aesthetically, sure, I prefer black, but I kind of like how loud it is. It lets me see it. I'm used to a Cyclops now, and so this is more obvious. It stands out to me, and so I immediately notice the date, and that actually practically is quite nice. Design-wise, it's not my favorite, but practically, it's very useful. So the last two negatives. One is water resistance. The concern is always that if it's 30-meter water resistant rated, those gaskets or those entry points in the watch are more accessible. And I think the question mark there is, like any chronograph, how worried are you that you're going to knock it or move it or misplace a gasket or somehow injure it, like through the slide rule bezel to get water into the watch? And I'm used to 100-meter water resistant through Rolex, or even 50-meter water resistant with a Speedmaster, meaning I could swim with it, that this is unusual for me to wear this. Now, that's being said, I've worn it a lot. I wore it in the rain the other day. I didn't choose to, but it started raining on me. It's a comfort thing. A lot of people will tell you, don't even wash your hands next to a Navitimer. You can do whatever you want with your watches. I tend to be a little bit more liberal. I tend to watch it. If I ever see humidity under the dial, I follow the rules, flip it upside down so that the dial is facing down so all the water can gather on the crystal. But I have not had any humidity yet. So we'll see about that. But that is a negative that a lot of people will have about the watch. The other negative is the no quick set date. And I can fix it with a watch winder. So it is easily fixable. But I have never had a watch without quick set date. And while the 7753 does technically have a quick set date function, it requires a pusher at about 11 o'clock, about 10:30. And this does not have that pusher. So it means you don't have access to that button, basically, to quick set the date, meaning the only way you can quick set the date is through the crown. And when I say quick set the date, I mean set the date is through the crown. So you got to unwind it and you got to wind it all the way forward every 24 hours until it flips over. Now, this watch itself is a little older. It might have some extra oil in the keyless works that's causing it to bind a little bit, making it harder to wind the crown, or it might just be a part of Navitimers that it's more difficult to wind the crown. But that difficulty to move the crown, coupled with the fact that there's no quick set date, coupled with the fact that the gear ratio on this thing, I have to really turn the crown a decent amount to actually get the hands to move a full hour, means that when I first got the watch, it was said that it was the 10th, and I needed to move it like 8 days forward. And it took me, I think, probably about 10 minutes-ish. Now, I was having a conversation at the same time, but I was just sitting there winding the crown, watching it turn all the way up to reach today's date. And that is a huge negative. I have heard of people that just wait until the date reaches today and then they start wearing the watch again. So let's say it died on the 21st. You'd wait till the 21st of the next month to then wear the watch again, which is absurd. But I have heard jokes or stories of people doing that. I prefer to wear it all the time to try and make sure that it never runs out. But it makes me more worried about making sure that the watch doesn't run out of power reserve, at least for more than a day. I could move it a day forward or 2 days, but past that, it starts to get to be a pain to set it. So that is a huge negative for me. Again, I can fix it with a watch winder, but I don't know. It's just one of those things where you tend to get spoiled with the current technology. And so when you go backwards in time, you tend to notice these things and wonder why they didn't ever fix that or why they didn't build it in the watch in the first place. Obviously, new technology, that's how it works, but either way. What are you guys' thoughts on the Navitimer? I obviously love it. I'm really in the honeymoon period. I've been enjoying it, but it's one of those things that you never know what happens on your journey. You might find something else. I might find something else that replaces it or adds to it and then makes it not as useful. I am going to do another video going over the Speedmaster versus the Navitimer, my thoughts on the two. So stay tuned for that. If you're interested, please subscribe. It supports the channel. I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.